Today, we're going to talk about the secrets of a long and happy marriage. We're going to talk about those things. It's a lot more complicated. We're going to look at the Bible together. And somebody, emailed me this week from Bethel and said, wow, you're talking about marriage and counseling, and you're actually using the Bible. And I said, yeah. And so that might be a new idea for you, but we're actually going to use the Bible today and find out what God has to say about these things. And before we go into understanding the problem, let me just say that, do you remember, some of you remember last week, I gave you an example, a medical example. And this was 23 years ago. My professor said to me, Tay, you seem to know a lot of answers, okay? But do you understand the problem? Do you understand the question? That's what he asked me. And that really helped me. That was really a turning point in my understanding, because I was very young and I felt like I knew a lot of stuff. But he challenged me and he said, do you really understand the problem? You have to first understand the problem, and then you will be able to come up with the right solution for that problem. And so he gave me the example, says, suppose you are driving a car, and I shared this last week, and you see somebody lying in the middle of the road. Would you get out of your car and quickly begin to operate? And his point is, no, you would not do that. You would first what? Diagnose the problem. Once you diagnose the problem, then you will know exactly what to do. And so since that time, most of my presentations have been two parts. I have always done a diagnosis, and then I would do an operation. And so that's why there's a part 1 and part 2. The first part is understanding the problem, where we try to diagnose it, okay? So that's where we are in the notes. We're going to try to understand the problem, and then later, after we take a break, we'll talk about how to fix the problem. But let's try to understand the problem. Now, I'm going to try to answer this one question, and it's right there on the screen. Why is it so hard to communicate? Okay? That question is not in your outline, but that's the question that's in the back of the whole thing. Okay? So I'm going to just leave it there the whole time. Why is communication so hard? And then we're going to start with the first one, okay? It's right there. The first one is, well, it's hard because, number one, we are not recognizing God's curse on marriage. Did you know that God cursed marriage? Now, that might sound shocking to you. Let me say that God cursed all relationships. Now, this might sound really surprising, and at the same time, I'm very disappointed because books don't talk about this. Remember I said last week that if you go to the Christian bookstore, a lot of the stuff that's out there is junk food. They're not going to teach you everything that the Bible has to say. To me, the first thing that you have to understand about relationship is that all relationships are cursed. God cursed all relationships, and that's why relationships are hard. Don't say to yourself, I don't understand it. Why is it so hard? Let me tell you something. It's hard because God cursed it. There is a fundamental problem with all relationships. And I know everybody wants to live happily ever after. You want the prince to come and take you into your castle and live happily ever after, and everything's fine. And you know what? I get this all the time. Married couples, they get married and your wedding day is just so beautiful, and you begin to believe that you really will live happily ever after. And my point is, that's impossible. You will not live happily ever after. Some of you are single and you're still waiting for Prince Charming to come. Let me tell you something. There's no such thing as a Prince Charming, okay? And you are not a princess, all right? So you're going to have to understand this. So it's impossible because, remember what I said last week? Oh, he's such a good boy. No, he's not. There's no such thing as a good boy. We're all sinners, right? Isn't that the most basic thing that we say as Christians? We are all sinners in God's sight. Meaning, our relationships also have sin. All relationships will begin to break down. And so I want to explain this a little bit to you because remember, part 1, before we take a break, is about diagnostics. It's about trying to understand the problem. So let's do that. Understanding the problem means that we have to go all the way back to the beginning in Genesis. When Adam and the woman, okay, she didn't get the name Eve yet. She got the name Eve later. If you want to know why, I'll explain later. But right now, she is just called the woman. So Adam and the woman have sinned against God. And now God comes down and God begins to pronounce curses. Remember that? He begins to list all the terrible things that are going to happen. Question, what chapter is that in Genesis? That's chapter what? 1, 2, or 3? It's chapter 3. And so in chapter 3, right in the middle of the curses, remember, God cursed a lot of things. He cursed hard work, right? He gave women pain in childbirth. There's a lot of curses that came. Now watch this. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, God said, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And people wonder, what does that really mean? And a lot of people think that that's positive because they think, wow, she has a desire for her husband. And I'm here to tell you that that desire is not a good thing. Okay? Now, how do we know that? First of all, that word desire in the original Hebrew is a very rare word. It only appears 2 times. Okay? Now, it appears here and only one other time. And we talked about it last week. It appears in Genesis chapter 4, verse 7, where it says, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. That's the only other place that the word occurs. And so what I'm saying is, you have to compare the two. And when you compare the two, by the way, you Hebrew scholars, you will see that in the original Hebrew, the construction of the sentences are exactly the same. Now you know it's talking about the exact same thing. Genesis 3, Genesis 4, talking about the same thing. Let me explain. In Genesis 4, it's Cain and Abel, right? Cain has this very bad desire. He wants to now hurt his brother. And God says, watch out. Sin has this desire to control you, but you must master it. That's the idea. Now, take that idea and go back to chapter 3. In chapter 3, your desire will be for your husband. How do you understand that? This way. You say, just like in Genesis chapter 4, sin has a desire, a very bad desire. A very bad desire to control Cain. Now the woman, and remember, God is talking about curses, right? So it can't be a good thing. It's in the context of a lot of bad things that are going to happen. And so God is saying, you know what? I originally wanted to bless the relationship, but you have sinned against me. And so now I'm going to curse the relationship. And when you look at the man now, you are going to have a very bad desire to control him. And by the way, that actually plays out. How many times do men complain that women nag and nag and nag and try to control and say, you know, how controlling their driving, what they eat, what they wear, and men go crazy. Okay? Back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, it says, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now, it is true that men are called to be the leader in the relationship, okay? If a relationship falls apart, I always say in counseling, it's the man's fault. I always look at the man and say, it's your fault, okay? This is your relationship, you better fix it. In this situation, even though he's called to be a good ruler, what he's saying is, the woman has this desire to control the husband, and now the man has a very bad desire to push her down and say, oh no, you're not going to control me, and begins to push her down. So you see the dynamic there? The woman tries to control, and now the man begins to push her down, saying, you're not going to control me. And so that's a big complaint that women have. Just like men complain that women nag all the time, one of the things that women complain is that men are very domineering. Hey, come over here right now. Okay? That kind of attitude, men trying to control women. And so these are very, very serious problems. Now I know We all want to live happily ever after, right? We all want to do it. Especially, and I find in counseling, and I've been counseling for about 15 years now, this really devastates women because all their lives they wait for their wedding. They think about that. Ever since they were little girls, they think about being a princess and getting married. And I was in Colorado just a few months ago, and a woman said, I have been praying for my husband for a very long time. I said, how long? Ever since I was in 6th grade. I said, what? 6th grade, I was praying for my husband. But you know what? Women think about their wedding a very long time. I have 2 girls. They talk about their wedding, okay? They think about what it's like and they daydream about it. And so when they get married, their relationship, if it breaks down, they become devastated. And they thought, I thought I would live happily ever after. Okay? And so these are the problems, especially for men. Women are thinking about it since they were little girls. You know what men are thinking about when they're little? They're not thinking about that. They're just playing with lightsabers, Star Wars, right? That's all they're doing. They're not thinking about any of these things whatsoever. All right. So why is it so hard to communicate? Number one is you have to first recognize. The problem is you're not recognizing it. You have to recognize that. So when in counseling, and I'm giving you a lot of tips, if you come and see me for counseling, that's the first thing I always explain. I said, do you understand that all relationships have a problem? It's a curse that God has placed on it. And you have to recognize that and understand it. So I explain to them Genesis 3. I explain to them Genesis 4. And I say, that's why you always are trying to attack one another. Okay? And that's why, husbands and wives, they always say, my husband hurt me more than anybody else. Okay? Everybody else is nice to me, but my husband is so mean to me. Okay? Well, that's the curse. Okay? So please understand that there is a curse that is in the relationship. Okay? So that's number one. Number two. Number two